Welcome. My name is Natasha Sherman, and I am your host. My guest today is Renee Kubiadis. She is the Executive Director of the AntiPoverty Network of New Jersey, otherwise known as APN. Welcome.
Thank you, Natasha. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I didn't want to start out with a preamble because you're the expert in what poverty looks like. That is what your organization is all about. So maybe you could just give me an overview of your mission.
Sure. So we seek to prevent, reduce, and ultimately end poverty in New Jersey. We are a statewide network of both organizations and individuals, very diverse organizations and individuals, including unions, faith-based organizations, nonprofit organizations, advocacy and policy organizations, government officials, and including individuals with lived experience of poverty and homelessness sometimes.
So you were one of those, right?
Yes.
You grew up poor.
Yes, I grew up in Camden County, New Jersey, and on welfare for families for most of my childhood, for 16 of the 18 years of my childhood. So I understand some of the barriers and issues that people face and some of the lack of supports that are there to help lift people out of poverty.
So I think what I'd like you to talk about is, you know, you are an agency of many agencies. And so it's, I think, tying in the threads of dealing with poverty, which includes housing, employment, wages, homelessness, hunger. So talk to me about how that all interweaves, and then some of the things that we need to be aware of.
Sure. The Anti-Poverty Network has historically focused on the issues of housing, hunger, economic empowerment, which includes wages, but also the benefits and assistance that are available to very low-income people, and more recently in the last few years on structural racism, which is a major cause of poverty in our country and in our state. And so we know that we can give people a little bit of housing assistance or some food, but if they have wages that aren't enough to sustain the high cost of living in our state, they're going to fall down and keep falling into the cracks and be pulled down into poverty and potentially homelessness on and off again. And so we really need to deal with the structural issues, which is why we work all together in the network to advocate for policy change at the state level mostly, but sometimes the federal level and other levels of government.
So when we're looking at policy change, what are some of the main things that we need to address and change?
Right. So certainly we need to strengthen the safety net for people who are homeless or near homeless in our state. And we're fortunate that in the last few months, we've had a couple of pieces of legislation signed into law to strengthen what's called emergency assistance for people who fall on hard times, and extend it more to people who are considered chronically unemployable as well for a number of years. And so those things have helped. We also have worked with our partners around the state to increase the minimum wage, which we saw signed into law by Governor Murphy on February 4th of this year. So that will be increasing over the next few years to help people to get to a better income level, to maintain their basic needs, because that's what happens, like you said, with the interconnectedness. You know, you may help somebody with food, but they may fall behind on their rent next week or next month. And so we need to look at all of these things together as basic needs for human beings. And how do we support people to reach all of that?
Yes, and I want to get back to particularly like the impact on children, because the children are the next generation.
Absolutely.
And you know, what are we doing to support them? It seems to me, I read that, you know, based on the federal guidelines, and I may be getting this wrong, New Jersey doesn't fall into the, you know, a percentage of like how many people are living at the poverty level, but it's just because the expenses in New Jersey, it's so expensive to live here, that they're really the working poor.
Absolutely. Most of the poor in our state are working. And so we have a report from the United Way of Northern New Jersey called the ALICE report. ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed. And it shows that almost 40% of people in our state are struggling just to meet basic needs. Not talking about school supplies for their children or clothes and shoes for school or medical care or cleaning supplies for their home, any of these toiletries.
40%.
Almost, yeah, so 38.5% according to the Alice report that was released last October, the most recent report. And that's almost 2 out of 5 of people in this state, right? And so we know we've had growing inequality for a number of years. And it's because of these structural issues that I talked about earlier that we've been taking away assistance and making it even harder to climb out of poverty. So those are the things that we, are working towards. One of the things that we know is that we used to cover in the late 80s and even into the 90s 100% of poor children in our state through the TANF program, Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, as well as its predecessor in the 80s. And unfortunately now we cover less than 20% of poor children in that program to support those families and children. And so we and our partner New Jersey Policy Perspective and many others around the state through a work group have been putting together a reform plan for what's called the Work First New Jersey program in our state to reform the system for the first time since welfare reform in 1996, to really support families and help lift them and the children out of poverty so that we don't have the health effects for these children later in life, the decreased income that persists throughout their lifetime, right?
Sure.
All of these effects that we know happen for children who
And
start
let's-
out disadvantaged.
Yes, and let's face it, if they're hungry and they're struggling just to manage their day-to-day life, it's hard for children to thrive and to
Right.
even show up at school and be
Exactly.
able to absorb and do well. And they're the ones who can make a difference
Sure.
later on. But
Absolutely.
if they're starting shackled already, it's pretty difficult.
Absolutely.
I think one of the things that's important for us to get, because I'm stunned by that 38-40%, is we can no longer say it's those people,
Right,
first of
right.
all. The other thing is that I suspect most people aren't aware, and a large percentage of people are just managing their own struggles to survive. So it's hard to look outward and say, what can I do? And I think that's one of the things that program that you have. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So in 2015, I and a couple of colleagues started a program called Garden State Leaders. It's a 6-month leadership and advocacy institute for people with lived experience of poverty. It started with the New Jersey Coalition to End Homelessness, and a year later, the AntiPoverty Network became a partner on it. We have had 4 successful classes of people who have experienced homelessness many times, but certainly poverty in their lives at some point, come through that program and become amazing advocates because
What do you teach them?
yeah, so we touch on advocacy, how do you advocate on these issues at the local, county, and state level, and sometimes federal. We also talk about how do you talk to the media about these issues and tell the untold stories. Not how do you write an op-ed about an issue,
Right.
but how do you really engage with the media and develop relationships to make sure those stories of the community are being told and the almost 40% of people struggling in our state. We also practice and work with them on how to tell their own story in a way that has impact for many different audiences, whether it's talking to the media, talking to legislators, talking to people in their community, and many times they are advocates in their own communities, helping people or working in social service organizations at this point in their lives. And I just am privileged to be a part of this program each and every time because there are such amazing people out there
And
who've
who
just fallen
can-
on hard times and don't have the supports to get back up.
And who can do this program?
So it's anybody who has any kind of lived experience of poverty at some point in their lives, even if it was in their childhood like me. And so they just have to have an understanding of some of the issues, but we also talk about the structural issues and the interconnections and the policy so that they have a more well-rounded idea of how to advocate on these issues.
And does it cost them anything to do this?
No, it's free.
And anybody can do it?
Anyone can do it if they have any experience of poverty in their life.
Right.
They don't even have to be from New Jersey. They could have grown up somewhere else and be here now.
That's good to know.
We rotated around to different universities who've hosted us over the last few years. So we're starting our next program on September 6th at Seton Hall University in South Orange. We also provide transportation assistance if people need it, whether they're taking public transportation or driving.
Wow. That's phenomenal. To me, that is like, that is so empowering. And, it's so easy when you've lived that experience to feel helpless, to feel like you don't have a voice. And if you have a voice, it's not going to be heard. And to actually teach them to tell their story effectively sounds extraordinary.
And they're amazing. There are advocates who speak to the press, who speak at legislative press conferences in Trenton, who are talking to people all the time. And every time I hear them speak, they just get better and better in effectively telling the story and messaging. What poverty truly is, the truths about poverty, that it's not this myth that we believe that somebody's made a bad decision, that they've done something wrong in their life, so it's their own individual fault. It's this system, this structure that we have to change. And they're just such amazing messengers of that.
Wow. So then my next question is one of the unanswerable questions, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How did we get here? Like, where did we go wrong?
A lot of different reasons. I'm a social worker by education. I have my undergraduate and graduate degrees in social work. And so we, as a nation, started out with the Elizabethan poor laws that we inherited from England.
And those are?
Just in terms of your rights and dignity as a person and worth as a person are tied to property ownership, right? And unfortunately, that persists, whether we realize it or not, in a lot of our policies and how we view people today. And so if people are renters, they're viewed in a different way, and they don't have access to certain things in our society. And so, that's a lot of where we came to this idea of, you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and I did it myself, so you should be able to too. And so I say back, like, how can people pull themselves up by their bootstraps when they don't have boots to begin with? Right, when they're disadvantaged to begin with. They don't have the education that others have in other parts of the state or just even the next town over. They don't have access to the same transportation to get to employment. They don't have access to the jobs. They don't have access to building those soft skills through their upbringing, through the people around them that help get them into the college that they want to get into the career that they want to get into. And there's so many things that we take for granted that many of us have access to and privilege.
Like?
Just, again, some of the things I just mentioned, but just having access to someone who will care for your young child when you're starting out and struggling, who's stable, so that you can go and do the things you need to get ahead. Right?
Yes.
All of these kinds of things that we take for granted, but don't realize that those were the things that helped us to get where we are today. And we didn't just pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. We had so many people around us helping to do that. It wasn't just us as individuals doing that. And so then we unfortunately blame the people who don't have those supports and can't get where they need to be.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's very, as you say, it started way back when, but it still is pervasive in the undercurrent of how we perceive poverty. And
how we write laws and policies as well.
And that whole thing about taking it for granted. And I think that's really a big piece, is thinking bigger than, I did it, as opposed to, well, how did I do it?
Right.
What support systems did I have? What did I take for granted? That I had a school bus pick me up and take me to school, that I had food, that I had teachers, that I lived in a community where I felt safe.
I didn't go to school hungry. I didn't go to school not knowing where I was going to put my head that night to sleep. Right? All of these things.
And what about housing? Like, I was reading somewhere in some of the literature on your site, the whole idea of, affordable housing in communities where, it's kind of, they don't want it there. They want to have these little enclaves of, people who are doing well, and those people can be over there. So what needs to happen there?
A lot of advocacy is education, right? And so we need to be talking in our communities about the realities and the truths of poverty and why people are there in terms of the structural issues, and dispel the myths that somehow these are dangerous people. These are people with severe mental illness that are going to be harmful to me in some way, or they're going to drive down my property values, and that these are just basic people who've fallen on hard times, and that it can really happen to almost anyone in our country. One of the first sessions of our Garden State Leaders program back in 2015, I walked in on a lunchtime conversation of somebody who had just returned from Florida from a yoga ashram, and he was talking about a famous yogi whose yoga book I started using 22 years ago to learn yoga as a yoga teacher. And I said, how do you know him, and why were you at this yoga ashram in Florida? He said, oh, I edited that book for him years ago.
Wow.
And it was an amazing kind of realization. Yes, this really can happen to anyone.
Yeah, so here he edited this book that kind of fathered yoga into this country.
Right.
And now he's in a poverty group.
And was homeless, yeah, on and off. And it really can happen to anybody. We have this hidden problem of homelessness, I like to say, where you might be sitting next to somebody in any kind of public setting, or standing next to them in a grocery store, or working next to them in an office, and not even realize they're sleeping in their car or couch surfing. Or your child is going to school with children who are homeless right now. But it's a hidden problem because they may be working still. They may even have a gym membership they paid off and are still going to the gym to shower and things like that, or have a car that was paid off prior, so they still have a way to get around or someplace to sleep if they're not somewhere else. So we take those things as, oh, they're just like me, and yes, they are. Right?
Except with no
they're part
money.
of our community, but they don't have enough income to meet all of their basic needs on a regular basis, and they fall in and out of homelessness and poverty. And Monica Goldrick-Robb, who's a professor at Temple University and formerly University of Wisconsin, founded the Hope Lab, has done a great deal of research on the homelessness and hunger issues on our college campuses. In 2012, there were something like 10 food pantries on college campuses nationwide. 5 years later, in 2017, there were over 500. And so,
oh my
I'm
God.
sorry, actually over 2,500 food pantries on college. And it's growing because what happens is we started cutting back on the supports to families in welfare reform in 1996 under the new TANF program, and cutting them off after 5 years when we didn't really give them the supports to get ahead and get into stable employment and stable housing and all of that. But yet they were cut off from any further assistance, and those issues persisted in the children who are now college students, trying to better their own lives, but yet still struggling to even meet basic needs. And so we need to look at all of these issues and understand that it could be anyone. It could be the person standing or sitting next to you.
Well, the evidence is clearly there. When you talk about food pantries, 2,500 food pantries on campuses,
Right.
It's very eye-opening.
And many of our community colleges and universities in New Jersey are hiring homeless liaisons and establishing these food pantries to make sure that their students aren't going hungry, and that they actually have the supports they need to be there in the classroom and to complete degrees and get that economic mobility that can come with a degree. But many times, students, even at a 2-year university at a county college, can't even complete the degree within 6 years because of all these other challenges they're facing constantly.
How do you not give up?
I believe in the power of human beings understanding this issue when we reframe what poverty is and why people are poor, and that people will stand up and do the right thing and say we need to change the system.
So how do we So, you're talking to an audience here. What is it that you would like them to be aware of, or what actions would you like them to take?
Well, certainly they can become a part of our network.
And how do they do that?
So we start our membership at $25 a year for an individual, and $25 for smaller organizations, all the way up to $200. So it's very cost effective to become a member. We try to make sure that no one is excluded from the conversation. We want everyone at the table who has a concern about some of these issues.
And what does a member, besides
Sure.
paying $25, what does a member mean?
Right, so they're part of a wider network. We do education so they can learn more about the issues. We have a policy committee meeting policy committee that meets every couple of months at least, where they can learn more about all the policy issues that impact people and create barriers in our state, but also opportunity, or could it propose opportunity or change for people. We also have our annual poverty summit that people can attend, and it's a pretty low cost for the day. It's only $40 for our early bird until September 1st, and then $50 for the whole day conference after that.
And when is that happening?
That is October 25th at Middlesex County College in Edison, and they can find information on our website at antipovertynetwork.org.
And
we
what does
bring
that
in
day, tell me.
experts to do workshops throughout the day, panel conversations, to hear from people with lived experience of poverty and homelessness, to really understand the issues so that we can be better prepared to advocate together for the change that needs to happen, and come together. Too many times we're separated by some of the rhetoric that's out there in terms of, well, it's this group's problem, and they're trying to take our resources, and so we all need to come together to solve these issues, because poverty does not, and homelessness do not discriminate. They impact everybody.
And I think for me, what sounds like it's very easy to be overwhelmed by all the things that are, pervasively wrong: drug addiction, homelessness, poverty, whatever. It's also very easy to be resigned, like there's nothing I can do, and and feeling disempowered, so you don't even try. So here's a way, it sounds to me, like an easy way to get engaged.
Absolutely.
People will tell you how to be engaged. People will tell you how to make a difference, so that you can feel less powerless. And and it's not like you're choosing one over the other, because they're all intertwined. Poverty is poverty, and it includes homelessness, drug addiction, no housing, working poor, all of that.
Absolutely. It's all connected, and we all need to be in conversation together to solve these issues. And one of the biggest compliments I got recently was from one of our Garden State leaders, who said, I'm a former female veteran. I'm a veteran, and one of the biggest populations increasing right now in homelessness is female vets. And I've been banging my head against the wall, not knowing where to go, who to talk to, and haven't gotten anywhere in terms of my concerns. But now, through the Garden State Leaders Program, I'm talking to congressmen, I'm talking to county freeholders, and I'm talking to the people who have the information and the data I need to move forward policy solutions, and I can't thank you enough. And it was just, amazing to hear that, that we're able to connect people together.
Is it just me? I mean, I find it jaw-dropping to hear stories of veterans who, aren't they told you're serving your country? So why are they coming home and finding themselves homeless, having to fight for medical attention, having to fight for to be taken care of when they have done their service? And then there are these ads like adopt a veteran kind of thing. I don't understand. Didn't you promise that if you're going to serve your country, we're going to serve you? I don't get it.
And so similar to just the issue of poverty in general, changes have been made over the last several decades that have shifted the support for our veterans, and so we don't provide them with the adequate supports even while they're in the military for housing and basic needs, and then when they get out, they're struggling. We don't, provide them with enough adequate health care to meet
Mental
their
health
needs.
care.
Right, exactly. And so we have these then resulting issues of poverty and homelessness and unaddressed mental health
I
conditions.
don't understand why there's not an uproar that is loud enough to be heard on the other side of the world.
Sure, and I think that's true for any human being who suffers poverty or homelessness in the
Yes.
country.
Yes.
One person is too
It's
many.
true. And you know, and the thing that I keep wanting to bring home is the fact that if we're at 38%, it didn't start out there, it got up
Right,
there.
right.
And that it's going to continue unless people get involved.
Absolutely.
It'll go to 50%. And
Right.
is this what we want for our homes, our state, our communities?
Right, right. With so many people struggling, and it's not just the struggle; it's the resulting mental health conditions because they're under constant stress on a daily basis,
Yes.
trying to juggle and balance between paying this or paying that, and feeling at any moment it's all going to fall apart. You know, and so yes, we need to address this in order for us to be the society that we want to be and to have the communities that we want that really are supportive of people. Societies were set up in order for us to support one another,
Yeah.
and we've lost that, and so we need to get back to it.
Yeah. And I think what you're doing is extraordinarily valuable, especially in the education portion and just bringing in everybody and getting them involved. So we have 1.5 minutes left. Any message, any particular request?
Sure. You know, again, become a member, donate to help us to achieve these goals that we're striving for together. Or attend our Poverty Summit. Our 20th anniversary theme on October 25th is how do we achieve the bold solutions to end poverty in the next 20 years together.
Yeah, and to me, $40 for a day to be engaged and get next steps. People want next steps. They just don't know what they are.
Right, right. And together we can do so much more.
Yeah.
When we all join.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
you for what you do.
Thank you.
And I hope to see you at on October 24th.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
My name is Natasha Sherman. Thank you for joining us.